Hello and welcome to today's episode of The Jungle. Today I'm planning on covering pages 40 to 44-ish. You know how that goes. In the last edition, we were following them as they toured the pork-making industry, the pork butchering plants specifically. Today they are going to be going through the beef side of the butchering industry. So we're at page 40, top of the page. Then the party went across the street to where they did the killing of beef, where every hour they turned 400 or 500 cattle into meat. Unlike the place they had left, all this work was done on one floor, and instead of there being one line of carcasses which moved to the workmen, there were 15 or 20 lines, and the men moved from one or another of these. This made a scene of intense activity, a picture of human power wonderful to watch. It was all done in one great room, like a circus amphitheater, with a gallery for visitors running over the center. Along one side of the room ran a narrow gallery, a few feet from the floor, into which gallery the cattle were driven by men with goads, which gave them electric shocks. Once crowded in here, the creatures were prisoned, each in a separate pen by gates that shut, leaving them no room to turn around, and while they stood bellowing and plunging over the top of the pins, there leaned one of the knockers, armed with a sledgehammer, and watching for a chance to deal a blow. The room echoed with the thuds in quick succession and the stamping and kicking of the steers. The instant the animal had fallen, the knocker passed on to another, while a second man raised a lever, and the side of the pin was raised, and the animal, still kicking and struggling, slid out to the killing bed. Here a man put shackles about one leg, and pressed another lever, and the body was jerked up into the air. There were 15 or 20 such pins, and it was a matter of only a couple of minutes to knock 15 or 20 cattle and roll them out. Then once more the gates were opened, and another lot rushed in, and so on out of each pen there rolled a steady stream of carcasses, which the men upon the killing beds had to get out of the way. Okay, so I want to describe this a little bit further. First of all, if you're not familiar with a sledgehammer has a very, very heavy head on it, a big mallet type head that's blunt on both ends, and then it has a really long handle. And the way that you operate a sledgehammer is by hefting it up, back, over your shoulder, and then coming down with it using the whole weight of your body, using the expansion of your hips, in order to really drive as much force as possible down with the sledgehammer. So using a sledgehammer takes a lot of practice so that you don't end up hurting yourself in the sledgehammering business. So you have these guys who are called the knockers, who are running around on these little tiny catwalks in between the cattle pens, and they're slinging these big sledgehammers at the cow's forehead, because the cow has a very, very thick skull. And so if you hit the cow right kind of in between the eyes, in the middle of the forehead with the sledgehammer, you can knock out its neurological function for a temporary period of time. You are probably not going to kill it that way. And even, like it is a temporary amount of time. This all has to happen very quickly for the next step, because when that cow comes to again, it's going to be even more mad than it was before. And cattle are not known for being very intelligent. They get spooked, they get freaked out very easily, and they are very sensitive to each other's freak-it-outedness. So when one of them is freaking out, it causes all of them to kind of panic and stampede. And you're talking about an animal that weighs over 1,000 pounds. So it can do a lot of damage with its body weight when it's just throwing it around in a complete frenzy. So these knockers are hitting the cow in the middle of the head with a sledgehammer. In today's butchering industry, it's not done with the sledgehammer. It's usually done with what's called a bolt gun. So a bolt gun looks a little bit like a regular gun, except it has a long piece of iron, a long bolt that shoots out of the gun at very high speeds, but kind of hits like a catch on the back of the gun so it doesn't come out all the way. It just delivers a concussive force to the animal's forehead, hopefully enough to knock it unconscious again, so that they can slit the animal's throat while it's down and not neurologically function. Okay, this was clearly a very dangerous job to have, to be running around these little catwalks with a huge sledgehammer, and all these cows who very much don't want to be there and who are freaking out. If you fell off, you're probably going to die. You're going to get trampled to death before anybody could get to you and help you out. Okay. The manner in which they did this was something to be seen and never forgotten. They worked with furious intensity, literally upon the run, at a pace with which there is nothing to be compared except a football game. It was all highly specialized labor, each man having his task to do. Generally, this would consist of only 2 or 3 specific cuts, and he would pass down the line of 15 or 20 carcasses, making these cuts upon each. Oh, I guess I meant to say, like, why can't you just shoot a cow? Oh, you're not sure? Okay, well, a couple of reasons. Number one, because a bullet is going to ruin the meat. As it tunnels through the muscle and tunnels through the meat, it's going to ruin that meat, and the whole point of butchering the cow is to get the meat. The second reason is that it puts a hole in the hide, and cow hide was made into leather, is still made into leather, so they don't want a hole in that either. Plus, then you've got any contaminants from the bullet, from the firing process that's getting into the meat, and you can't have those contaminants in there. And also, bullets are expensive. You know, you're killing thousands of cows a day, and that would end up being a lot of ammunition over the course of years and years in the butchering industry. So they've come up with these other ways to do it that don't hurt the meat. That sounds awful, but that's what we mean. That don't affect the meat quality as much. Okay. It was all highly specialized, each man having his task to do. Generally, this would consist of only 2 or 3 specific cuts, and he would pass down the line of 15 or 20 carcasses, making these cuts upon each. First, there came the butcher to bleed them. This meant one swift stroke, so swift that you could not see it, only the flash of the knife, and before you could realize it, the man had darted on to the next line, and a stream of bright red was pouring out upon the floor. This floor was half an inch deep with blood, in spite of the best efforts of men who kept shoveling it through the holes. It must have made the floor slippery, but no one could have guessed this by watching the men at work. The carcass hung for a few minutes to bleed. There was no time lost, however, for there were several hanging in each line, and one was always ready. It was let down to the ground, and there came the headsman, whose task it was to sever the head, with 2 or 3 swift strokes. Then came the floorsman to make the first cut in the skin, and then another to finish ripping the skin down the center, and then half a dozen more in swift succession to finish the skinning. After they were through, the carcass was again swung up, and while a man with a stick examined the skin to make sure that it had not been cut, and another rolled it up and tumbled it through one of the inevitable holes in the floor, the beef proceeded on its journey. There were men to cut it, and split it, and men to gut it and scrape it clean inside. There were some with hoses, which threw jets of boiling water upon it, and others who removed the feet and added the final touches. In the end, as with the hogs, the finished beef was run into the chilling room to hang its appointed time. The visitors were taken there and shown them, all neatly hung in rows, labeled conspicuously with the tags of the government inspectors, and some which had been killed by a special process, marked with the sign of the kosher rabbi, certifying that it was fit for sale to the Orthodox. And then the visitors were taken to the other parts of the building to see what became of each particle of the waste material that had vanished through the floor, and to the pickling rooms and the salting rooms, the canning rooms and the packing rooms, where choice meat was prepared for shipping in refrigerated cars, destined to be eaten in all the 4 corners of civilization. Afterward they went outside, wandering among the mazes of buildings in which was done the work auxiliary to this great industry. The word auxiliary means like a second purpose. So the first purpose is to butcher animals for meat. The second purpose, though, is to take the leftover meat products, like the hooves and the bone and the sinew, and turn it into other products that are secondary to the butchering industry. There was scarcely a thing needed in the business that Durham and Company did not make for themselves. Okay, so start thinking back to your definitions of monopolies. We talked about horizontal monopolies and vertical monopolies. Try and figure out which one this is. There was scarcely a thing needed in the business that Durham and Company did not make for themselves. There was a great steam power plant and an electricity plant. There was a barrel factory and a boiler repair shop. There was a building to which the grease was piped and made into soap and lard. And there was a factory for making lard cans and another for making soap boxes. There was a building in which the bristles were cleaned and dried for the making of hair cushions and such things. There was a building where the skins were dried and tanned. There was another where the head and feet were made into glue, and another where the bones were made into fertilizer. No tiniest particle of organic matter was wasted in Durham's. Out of the horns of the cattle, they made combs, buttons, hairpins, and imitation ivory. Out of the shin bones and other big bones, they cut knife and toothbrush handles and mouthpieces for pipes. Out of the hooves, they cut hairpins and buttons before they made the rest into glue. From such things as feet, knuckles, hide clippings, and sinews came such strange and unlikely products as gelatin. Jell-O, guys! Jell-O. So if you're a vegetarian, and definitely if you're a vegan, you shouldn't be eating Jell-O because it's made from ground up animal bits, if you were not aware of this. It still is today. That's how we make Jell-O. Unlikely products is gelatin, isinglass and phosphorus, bone black, shoe blacking, and bone oil. They had curled hair works for the cattle tails, and a wool pullery for the sheepskins, and they made pepsin from the stomachs of pigs, and albumin from the blood, and violin strings from the ill-smelling entrails. These used to be referred to as catgut strings, not because they were usually made from cats' guts, usually still from pig intestines and cow intestines, but they still make the highest quality strings for violins and guitars and other stringed instruments. When there was nothing else to be done with a thing, they first put it into a tank and got out of it all the tallow and grease, and then they made it into fertilizer. All these industries were gathered into buildings nearby, connected by galleries and railroads with the main establishment, and it was estimated that they had handled nearly 250 million animals since the founding of the plant by the elder Durham a generation or more ago. If you counted with it the other big packing plants, and they were now really all like one, it was, so Jacobus informed them, the greatest aggregation of labor and capital ever gathered in one place. It employed 30,000 men. It supported directly 250,000 people in its neighborhood, and it indirectly supported 500,000. It sent its products to every country in the civilized world, and it furnished the food for no less than 30 million people. Okay, quick reminder of your monopolies. A horizontal monopoly. You buy out all of your competition, giving you complete control over quality and price, which is why it's illegal, because people don't have any choices anymore. You can make the quality as low as you want and still charge as high of a price as you want. On a vertical monopoly, you buy all the factors of production, which means you eventually drive all of the competition out of business. This one's a little bit sneakier. You may not intentionally have created a monopoly, but eventually a vertical monopoly is going to become a horizontal monopoly, so it is still illegal. In this case, if you picked up on it, what they are doing is creating a vertical monopoly. They have all the factors of production. They're making all of these side products, which means that they are completely controlling the business, and eventually that means that they completely control quality and price of what's available. Okay, back to the book for just another page or two. The very bottom of page 43, chapter 4. Promptly at 7 the next morning, Jurgis reported for work. He came to the door that had been pointed out to him, and there he waited for nearly 2 hours. The boss had meant for him to enter into the door, but he had not said this, so it was only when he was on his way out to hire another man that he came upon Jurgis. He gave him a good cursing, but as Jurgis did not understand a word of it, he did not object. He followed the boss, who showed him where to put his street clothes, and waited while he donned the working clothes he had bought in a second-hand shop and brought with him in a bundle. Then he led him to the killing beds. The work which Jurgis was to do here was very simple, and it took him but a few minutes to learn it. He was provided with a stiff besom, which is a very stiff broom, such as is used by street sweepers, and it was his place to follow down the line the man who drew out the smoking entrails from the carcass of the steer. This mass was to be swept into a trap, by which they mean like a trap door in the floor, like a hole in the floor that would cause it to fall down to the room below, which is where they're doing the processing of the intestines. This mass was to be swept into a trap, which was then closed so that no one might slip into it. That happened a lot, too. And if you slipped into the trap, you were going to be hurt or killed falling through to the floor below. As Jurgis came in, the first cattle of the morning were just making their appearance, and so, with scarcely time to look about him, and none to speak to anyone, he fell to work. It was a sweltering day in July, and the place ran with steaming hot blood. One waded in it on the floor. The stench was almost overpowering, but to Jurgis, it was nothing. His whole soul was dancing with joy. He was at work at last. He was at work and earning money. All day long he was figuring to himself. He was paid the fabulous sum of 17.5 cents an hour. And as it proved a rush day, and he worked until nearly 7 o'clock in the evening, he went home to the family with the tidings that he had earned more than $1.50 in a single day.